My daughter sent me a text on a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee. 1 cup, black, no sugar, the way Frank had taught me decades ago, back when coffee was something we shared over the morning paper. The shop on Maple Street didn't open for another hour. I had time, as I always did on Tuesday mornings, time to watch the frost dissolve on the kitchen window. Time to think about nothing in particular. 7 words appeared on my screen. Please don't come to my wedding. I read them twice, then a 3rd time. The coffee cooled in my hand. I set the mug down on the counter without drinking it. Callahan's sat on the corner of Maple and 3rd, between a hardware store and a shop that sold nothing but candles. I never put my name on the sign, just Antiques in faded gold letters that Frank had painted himself the year we opened, 11 years ago. He had been gone for 8 of them. The shop was small, crowded really, oak dressers pressed against mahogany side tables, brass lamps balanced on stacks of leather-bound books. In the back corner stood a grandfather clock, tall, dark-finished, silent for decades. Frank had bought it at an estate sale years before we opened the shop. He always said he would restore it. He ran out of time. I wound it every morning out of habit. The mechanism turned under my fingers, smooth and familiar, going nowhere. Diana had called the shop your hobby. Not once in 11 years had she come inside to browse. She stopped by occasionally to collect me for lunch, always in a hurry, always glancing at her phone, and would stand in the doorway with her arms folded, scanning the cluttered room with an expression I had learned not to examine too closely. She managed people the way some women managed households, efficiently, completely, and without asking whether the people being managed had wanted to be. The wedding was in 6 days. David Chen was a quiet man with kind eyes and a laugh that came easily. I had met him 4 times, twice for dinner, once at Christmas, and once at a coffee shop where Diana introduced us as though we were business contacts rather than family. His mother, Lynn, lived in Oakville. I had spoken to her once on the phone, a brief, polite exchange in which we established nothing useful about each other. I had known about the wedding for 4 months. Diana called on a Sunday afternoon, her voice carrying that brightness she used when she was managing a situation. David's family is handling most of the planning, Mom. You just show up and be normal. I had agreed. I had been agreeing to things from Diana for years. It was easier than the alternative, and I had forgotten, somewhere along the way, what the alternative was. The dress was navy blue. Fine silver beading ran along the neckline in a pattern subtle enough to catch light without demanding it. I had found it at a department store in Burlington on a Saturday in October, when the maple trees were turning and I had nowhere I needed to be. The saleswoman, young, patient, with reading glasses on a chain, helped me find the right size. I spent 40 minutes in the fitting room, turning in front of the mirror, watching the beading scatter light like something small and precious. It was the first piece of clothing I had chosen for myself, truly chosen, not grabbed off a rack between errands, in longer than I could count. It hung in my bedroom closet on a dry cleaning bag, waiting. That evening I went to the bedroom. I hadn't planned to. I meant to read, or call Frank's sister in Vermont, or do anything that wasn't standing in front of a closet with my hand on a hanger. But I unzipped the bag, lifted the dress out. The silk was cooler than I expected, navy and silver, light as breath. I put it on. The mirror showed me a woman who was not broken, 77 years old, and she looked like someone who had somewhere important to be, someone whose presence mattered at an occasion. I stood there for 10 minutes, studying my own face, the lines around my eyes, the silver in my hair that I no longer bothered to colour. Then I took the dress off, hung it back in the closet, smoothed the tissue paper into place, went to the kitchen, made another cup of coffee. This one I drank standing at the counter, looking out at the dark street and feeling the weight of the evening press against me from all sides. The next morning, I wound the clock in the back of the shop the way I always did. The mechanism turned, smooth, familiar, going nowhere. Diana had not sent a second message. 3 days passed. I opened the shop each morning at 9, dusted the brass lamps, rearranged a row of Edwardian teacups that a customer had been eyeing all week, wound the grandfather clock, unlocked the front door, and flipped the sign to "Open," and waited for whoever came through. Not many people came on weekdays. A retired teacher named Harold who liked to talk about Civil War history, the Battle of Antietam, the politics of Reconstruction, things that had happened 160 years ago and mattered to him with an enthusiasm I found quietly admirable. A young couple looking for a wedding gift, which landed close enough to my own situation that I had to press my fingernails into my palm to keep my expression neutral. I helped them find a set of Victorian silver spoons, and they thanked me so genuinely that I felt, briefly, like someone useful in the world. I did not think about Diana, or rather, I did not allow myself to think about her, which is a different thing entirely. The thought was always there, pressing against the edges of my mind like water against a dam. I kept the dam up. I went about my days. I made my coffee and wound my clock and helped my customers and did not call my daughter, and if anyone had asked me how I was, I would have said fine, because that is what you say when the alternative is the truth, and the truth was too large and too quiet to put into words over a counter. On Friday afternoon I went to the farmer's market on Oak Street. It was late in the season. Most of the stalls had already closed for the winter, but there was still one that sold local honey and another run by an old woman named Bess, who grew the best carrots I had ever tasted. I bought honey and carrots and a small jar of apple butter and stood at the edge of the market with my canvas bag, watching the last of the autumn light fall across the street in long, pale strips. That's when I saw her. I didn't know her at first. She was standing near the honey stall, examining a jar of wildflower with the kind of focused attention that seemed excessive for honey. She was about my height, tall for a woman, with steel grey hair cut short and practical. She wore a good wool coat, the kind that said money without announcing it. Her posture was straight, Her hands were steady. I noticed her because she looked like someone who was trying very hard not to look lost. I walked past her once, then turned back. I don't know what made me do it. Something in the way she was holding the jar too tightly, as though it were the only thing keeping her anchored to the ground. "That's a good one," I said. "Bess keeps her bees in the orchard behind the Presbyterian church. The honey tastes like October." The woman looked up. Her eyes were blue-grey, sharp, and for a moment they held something raw. Surprise, maybe, or relief at being spoken to by another human being. "Does it?" She set the jar down carefully. "I haven't bought honey in years. My daughter-in-law handles the groceries."
"Mine handles everything,"
I said.
"When she bothers to."
We stood there a moment. Two women at the edge of a farmer's market, neither of them quite ready to leave. "I'm Lynn," she said. "Margaret." We ended up at a small cafe on the corner of Oak and Birch, one I had been walking past for years without ever going inside. The interior was warm and slightly cluttered. Mismatched chairs, the smell of ground coffee, a window that looked out onto the street. Lynn ordered black tea, I ordered coffee. We sat by the window with our coats still on, as though we might need to leave at any moment, and we talked. It started with pleasantries. Where we lived, how long we had been in the area, the weather, which was turning cold enough to matter. Lynn lived alone in Oakville. Her husband had left 15 years ago, not died, left. She said it plainly, without self-pity, the way someone states a fact that has long since stopped being painful and has simply become part of the landscape of a life. "I have a son," she said. "David." I looked at her. "David Chen," I said. "You know him? He's marrying my daughter." Lynn's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes, a recognition, a click, like two pieces of a puzzle finding each other in the dark. "Margaret." She set her teacup down. "Were you invited to the wedding?" The question landed in the space between us like a stone dropped into still water. I could have lied. I could have said, "Yes, of course I will be there. Everything is fine." I had been saying versions of that sentence my entire life, smoothing things over, keeping the surface calm, letting the trouble sink beneath where no one could see it. But I was 77 years old, and I was tired of it. "No," I said, "I wasn't." Lynn nodded slowly, as though she had expected this answer. "Neither was I," she said. We sat with that for a moment. Two mothers, uninvited to their children's wedding. The absurdity of it might have been funny in another life to another pair of women, but it was not funny. It was the kind of thing that settles into your chest, a cold, dense weight that doesn't move when you breathe. Lynn told me her story. David had called her 3 weeks earlier. Polite, as he always was. David had good manners, Lynn said, better than he had learned from either of his parents. He said Diana preferred a small ceremony, family only, and only the family that was comfortable. Lynn asked what that meant. David went quiet on the phone. He said he would get back to her. He had not. Diana, Lynn said, turning the name over as though tasting it for the first time. Your daughter. Yes, she's organised. That's one word for it. Lynn almost smiled. It was quick, a flash of something dry and knowing that appeared and vanished before it could fully form. I spent 20 years trying to be useful to people who didn't need me, she said. I thought that was what mothers did. I recognized the feeling behind those words, not the specific words, the shape of them. The long, slow erosion of believing your value to someone is measured entirely by how much you can give without being thanked. It was Lynn who said it first. We were finishing our drinks, the cafe nearly empty around us, the light outside going grey and thin. She set her cup down and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on another woman's face in years, not sympathy, not pity, but something steadier, something that looked like a door already open. We should go, she said. Go where? To the wedding. She said it simply, no drama in her voice, no anger, just a statement, calm and clear, like someone announcing the weather, together, as each other's guests. I stared at her. They didn't invite us, I said. No, Lynn agreed, they didn't. Diana will. Partly. Lynn shrugged. One shoulder precise. But she can't stop us. We're not trespassing. We're attending a wedding. Anyone can attend a wedding. I opened my mouth, closed it. I don't know if I can do that, I said. Lynn looked at me for a long time, those blue-grey eyes, steady and unhurried. You don't have to decide now, she said, but think about it. Think about what it means to let someone else decide where you're allowed to stand. We exchanged phone numbers, walked out of the cafe into the cold. Lynn's car was a dark blue sedan, practical, well-maintained. She shook my hand before she got in, a firm, business-like grip. Call me, she said, and drove away. I did not call Lynn that night. I sat in the living room with a glass of wine I didn't finish and turned the idea over in my mind the way you might turn over a stone found on a beach, examining it from every angle, feeling its weight, wondering what lived underneath. The arguments against it were obvious. Diana would be humiliated. There would be a scene, not a dramatic one, not shouting or tears, but something worse, the tight smile, the controlled voice, the way Diana could make you feel, without raising her voice a single octave, that you had done something unforgivable simply by existing in a space she had not sanctioned. I knew that expression. I had been on the receiving end of it for 20 years, and each time I had looked away from it, told myself it didn't matter, told myself that keeping the peace was more important than whatever it was I was feeling. The arguments for it lived not in logic but in something older, something that sat in my bones and had been waiting, patient and silent, to be acknowledged. The feeling that I had spent decades shrinking myself to fit into the shape of what was expected. The quiet, persistent sense that somewhere along the way Margaret Callahan, the woman who had opened an antique shop, who had loved Frank with every complicated, imperfect piece of her heart, who had lived 77 years on this earth, had disappeared behind the role of Diana's mother, a function, a resource, a woman whose feelings were tolerated but never sought, whose presence was managed but never wanted. I knew what it felt like to disappear. I had been disappearing for a long time. On Saturday I opened the shop late, 9:30 instead of 9. I sat behind the counter with my coffee and watched the street through the front window and let my mind turn over the question without forcing it toward an answer. Harold came in at 10, as he always did, and began talking about the Battle of Antietam. I let him talk. His voice filled the shop, warm, rambling, passionate about events that had happened 160 years ago. I liked Harold. He never once made me feel that my time was something to be managed or my attention something to be rationed. After he left, I called Lynn. "I want to go," I said. No preamble, no hedging. A pause on the other end. Then, "Good. What time should I be ready?" "The ceremony starts at 4. We should arrive by 3:30. Early enough to find seats, late enough not to look like we're trying too hard." "I won't look like I'm trying too hard," I said. "No," Lynn said. "I didn't think you would." The 2 days before the wedding passed with a strange, deliberate slowness. I went to the shop. I wound the clock. I helped a woman from 2 towns over find a set of antique picture frames for her grandchildren. Beautiful things, gilt-edged, from the Victorian period, and the woman held them up to the light and said they were perfect, and I wrapped them carefully in tissue paper and watched her leave with something close to happiness. I ate dinner alone each evening, simple things, soup, pasta, a salad with the last of Bessie's carrots. I ate at the kitchen table with a book propped against the salt shaker the way I had for years. Frank used to tease me about it. He said it was the most efficient way to live, and he meant it as a gentle joke, but I had always taken it as a kind of compliment. Efficiency. Getting through the meal so you could get back to whatever mattered. On Sunday evening, I called Diana. I hadn't planned to. The phone was in my hand before I had fully decided. It rang 4 times. Then voicemail. Diana's voice, bright and professional, the same tone she used at work. I did not leave a message. I hung up and set the phone down on the counter and stood very still, feeling the silence press against me. She did not call back. That night I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and felt something shifting inside me. Not anger. Anger is loud, and what I felt was quieter than that. It was more like a door opening onto a room I had kept locked for a very long time. A room where the woman I used to be was sitting in a chair, waiting. Patient as only someone who has been waiting for years can be. Monday was the day before the wedding. I spent the morning in the shop, but I wasn't truly there. My hands moved through the motions, dusting, arranging, winding the clock while my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about the venue. Diana had mentioned it once in passing. The Whitmore Estate, a converted farmhouse on 20 acres outside the city. Elegant, curated, the kind of place where every detail had been chosen to project a particular image of who the people inside it were supposed to be. I was thinking about walking through the doors of that place, uninvited. Not crashing, not causing a scene, just walking in, quietly, with my back straight and my chin level and Lynn beside me, 2 women in good coats who had decided that their presence in a room was not something that required anyone else's permission. The thought made my hands tremble slightly when I reached for the winding key. I wound it anyway. That evening I took the dress down from the closet again. This time I did not put it on. I held it up in front of the mirror and looked at it the way you might look at a letter you are about to send, weighing what it meant, feeling the significance of it settle into your chest. Navy blue, silver beading. A dress I had chosen because it was beautiful, not because someone else needed me to wear it. I hung it on the back of the bedroom door, where I could see it from the bed. I called Lynn one last time. "Are you sure about this?" I asked. "Margaret." Her voice was calm, unhurried. "I have been sure about this since the moment I sat down with you in that cafe. And if Diana, then Diana will have to decide what kind of daughter she wants to be." A pause. "And so will you decide what kind of mother you are. Not the kind who disappears, the kind who stays." I thanked her, hung up, lay in the dark for a long time, listening to the house settle around me, the creak of old wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the silence that had been my companion for 8 years. Tomorrow I would wear the dress. Tomorrow I would walk into a room where I was not wanted. And I would stay. I spent Tuesday afternoon choosing shoes. This might sound like a small thing. It was not. I had not chosen shoes with any care in years. I wore the same brown leather flats I had bought at a pharmacy, comfortable, forgettable, put on each morning without looking. But on Tuesday afternoon I stood in my bedroom closet and went through every pair I owned, slowly, deliberately, the way someone might sort through evidence. I chose a pair of low black heels I had not worn since Frank's funeral. Simple, well made. They added 2 inches to my height and made my ankles look the way they used to, and when I put them on and stood in front of the mirror, I felt something settle into place, like a piece of furniture finally pushed back to where it belonged. I set them beside the dress on the bedroom door. Ready. The Whitmore estate was the kind of place that made you feel your clothes were not good enough. Lynn picked me up at 2:15. Her dark blue sedan was clean, the interior smelling faintly of pine, not air freshener, but something real, something that suggested she kept the windows open when weather allowed. She was wearing a charcoal dress with a single strand of pearls and an expression of absolute calm, as though she were driving to a pleasant afternoon appointment and nothing more. "How do you feel?" she asked as I settled into the passenger seat. Ready, I said, and meant it. We drove in comfortable silence for 20 minutes. The estate appeared at the end of a long gravel drive, framed by old oaks whose leaves had mostly fallen. The main house was white clapboard with black shutters, surrounded by manicured grounds and a row of luxury cars parked neatly along the side. String lights had been strung between the trees, delicate, golden, the kind of detail that looked effortless but had taken someone hours to arrange. Beautiful and intimidating in the way that very beautiful places sometimes are, as though the beauty itself were a kind of gate designed to remind you of what you could and could not touch. Lynn turned off the engine, sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel. "Remember," she said, "we are guests. We are polite. We do not apologize for being here." "I know. And Margaret?" She turned to look at me. "Those steady blue-grey eyes. You look lovely." We walked in through the main entrance. The foyer was white marble and fresh flowers, white roses, dozens of them, arranged in tall glass vases that caught the late afternoon light and scattered it across the floor. A woman in a black dress stood near the door with a clipboard. She looked up as we approached, and her smile, practiced, professional, flickered for just a moment when she did not find our names on her list. "Good afternoon," Lynn said, before the woman could speak. Her tone was warm, unhurried, the voice of someone who has attended many events and is entirely comfortable in them. "We're here for the wedding." "Of course. Could I have your names?" "Lynn Chen and Margaret Callahan." The woman scanned her list, looked up, scanned again. Her professional smile held, but her eyes shifted, a quick, calculating assessment that took in our coats, our shoes, the quiet confidence with which we were standing. "I don't seem to have you on the guest list," she said. "You won't," Lynn said pleasantly, "but we are family. We're here to celebrate." There was a pause. The woman looked from Lynn to me. Then, with the kind of efficient decision that comes from years of managing other people's events, she stepped aside. "Please enjoy yourselves," she said. We walked past her into the wedding. The ceremony had not yet begun. Guests milled about in the garden behind the house, holding champagne flutes, wearing the kind of clothes that said money without effort. I recognized no one. Lynn moved through the crowd with an ease that suggested she had attended dozens of events exactly like this one, which she told me later she had, back when her marriage was still functioning and appearances still mattered. We found seats near the back of the garden, where white chairs had been arranged in rows, facing a small arch decorated with white flowers and trailing ivy. The seats were not labelled. We sat down. No one stopped us. The ceremony was short and tasteful. David and Diana stood beneath the arch in the golden light, and Diana looked, I will say this honestly, radiant. She wore a simple white dress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, and she smiled at David with an expression I had seen on her face only once before, years ago, when she was very young and had not yet learned to manage what she showed the world. I watched my daughter get married. 40 feet away, in the back row, uninvited. I watched her, and I did not look away. The reception was held in a long white tent behind the estate, filled with round tables and more white roses, and a string quartet playing something classical and understated. Lynn and I found a table near the edge of the tent, not one of the assigned tables which had small cards with names on silver holders, but a smaller table near the bar that had been set up for the catering staff. It had no chairs. We found 2 and carried them over ourselves, setting them down quietly, side by side, as though we had always planned to sit there. No one asked us to leave. We ate from the buffet, drank the champagne that was passed around on silver trays, watched the speeches. David's best man, who told a story about a camping trip that made everyone laugh. Diana's maid of honour, who spoke about friendship and loyalty in the abstract way that suggested she did not know Diana very well at all. Lynn leaned toward me at one point and whispered, "This is good champagne." "It is," I whispered back. We sat together at our unofficial table, 2 women in good clothes at the edge of someone else's celebration, and we were not invisible. People noticed us. Glances came our way, curious, uncomfortable, quickly averted. But no one approached. No one said a word. Diana found me during the reception. I saw her coming from across the tent, that particular way she moved when she was about to have a conversation she did not want to have. Shoulders straight, chin slightly lifted. The expression she wore for situations that required control. She stopped in front of our table, looked at me, then at Lynn, then back at me. "Mum." One word, flat, not a greeting, a statement. "Diana." I met her eyes, did not look away, did not smile. "You weren't supposed to be here." "I know." We looked at each other. The tent was loud around us. Music, conversation, the clink of glasses. But where we stood, the air felt still, charged. Diana's jaw tightened. Her eyes moved to Lynn again, and something flickered there. Recognition, surprise, a flare of anger quickly controlled. "This isn't," Diana started. "It's your wedding day," I said, quietly, without raising my voice. "And I'm your mother. I wanted to see you get married." Diana held my gaze for a long moment. Her expression did not soften, but it did not harden either. It stayed where it was, somewhere between fury and something else, something I could not name and did not try to. Then she turned and walked away. It was after Diana left that the girl appeared. She was 15 or 16, hard to tell exactly, slight, with dark hair pulled back in a messy knot and an oversized cardigan that suggested she hadn't wanted to dress up for this any more than I had. She was carrying a plate of food and scanning the tent for somewhere to sit. She saw our table, looked at the 2 chairs, Lynn's and mine, and then at the empty space beside them where another chair could easily fit. Then she looked at us, and instead of walking away, she sat down. "You two look like you could use some company," she said. Lynn smiled. A real smile, warm, surprised, genuine. "We could," she said. "I'm Lynn. This is Margaret. Clara." The girl set her plate down, picked up a fork. "I'm David's niece." "Well, his sister's daughter. It's complicated." "Everything is complicated at weddings," I said. Clara looked at me with an expression that was, for a teenager, remarkably perceptive. Not curious exactly, knowing. As though she had already figured out who we were and why we were sitting at an unofficial table near the bar, and had decided that was perfectly fine. "The champagne's actually really good," she said. "Someone should tell the adults." Lynn laughed. I almost did. Clara stayed with us for the rest of the reception. The groom found me before we left. David Chen appeared at our table near the end of the evening, when the music had shifted from the string quartet to something recorded, and the guests were beginning to drift toward the parking area. He was still in his wedding suit, dark navy, well tailored, and his face carried an expression I had not seen on him before. Not the easy, pleasant smile he had worn all day, something quieter, something that looked like embarrassment, and beneath it, genuine shame. "Mrs. Callahan," he said. He stood in front of me, hands in his pockets, shifting his weight slightly, the only sign of discomfort I had ever seen from him. "I just found out about the invitation situation. I want you to know I didn't know." I looked at him. He was sincere. That much was obvious. David Chen had good manners, as Lynn had said, and good manners in this case meant telling the truth even when it cost something to say. "Thank you, David," I said. He nodded, glanced at Lynn. Something passed between them, mother and son, an understanding that did not require words. "I'm sorry," he said, simply. We shook hands. He went back to his wife, and I watched him go, this quiet, decent man who had married my difficult daughter and did not yet know what that would cost him over the years. Diana came to my house the next morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard the knock. Not the doorbell. Diana knew I kept the bell disconnected on purpose, though I had never told her why. She knocked 3 times, firm and deliberate. I opened the door. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked tired in a way that went beyond sleep, a tiredness that settled into the lines around her mouth and the slight droop of her shoulders. "Can I come in?" she asked. I let her in. We sat at the kitchen table. I made her coffee without asking. She wrapped both hands around the mug the way people do when they need something to hold on to. "Why did you come yesterday?" she asked. I looked at her across the table. This woman I had raised. This woman who had, for reasons I had spent years trying to understand and had finally stopped trying to understand, decided that I was someone to be managed rather than loved. Because I wanted to see my daughter get married, I said. The same words I had spoken the night before. They had not changed. They did not need to. Diana was quiet for a long time. She turned the mug in her hands, slowly, looking down at the coffee as though the answer to something were written in its surface. "I thought you'd embarrass me," she said, finally. "I didn't know." She looked up. Her eyes were red, though she was not crying. "You didn't. We sat with that." The silence between us was not comfortable, but it was not hostile either. It was the silence of two people who had said something true and were still feeling the weight of it settle. Diana left an hour later. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say anything else that I would remember. But she had come. She had sat across from me in my kitchen and asked me a question and listened to the answer without flinching. It was not enough, but it was a start. The following Tuesday I went to see my banker. Gerald at the credit union had handled my finances for 6 years. A careful man, methodical, who wore pressed shirts and spoke in a measured tone that I had always found reassuring. I sat across from his desk and told him what I wanted to do. I wanted to remove Diana's name from my savings account. The joint account we had set up 3 years ago when Diana had suggested, gently, reasonably, that it would be easier if she could access my funds in case of an emergency. I had agreed at the time. It had felt like the responsible thing to do. It did not feel responsible any more. Gerald nodded, made notes, did not ask why. I appreciated that more than I could have said. He processed the paperwork that afternoon, and when I signed the forms with careful, steady strokes, the pen moving across the paper with a precision that surprised me, I felt something release in my chest. A small knot loosening, a door closing quietly on a room I no longer wanted open. Clara called me 3 days later. She had gotten my number from Lynn. "I hope that's okay," she said, sounding not at all sorry, and asked if she could come see the antique shop. I said yes. She arrived on a Saturday morning, still in that oversized cardigan, her hair loose this time, blowing in the cold air when she pushed open the door. She stopped just inside the threshold and looked around, at the crowded shelves, the brass lamps, the stacks of leather-bound books, the grandfather clock standing silent in the back corner. "This is incredible," she said. And she meant it. Not the polite enthusiasm of someone being agreeable. Genuine surprise. Real interest, the kind that lights up a young person's face and makes you remember what it felt like to discover something for the first time. She spent 2 hours in the shop that first Saturday, asked questions about everything, where things came from, how old they were, what stories they carried. When she noticed the grandfather clock, she walked up to it and studied it for a long time, tilting her head, running one finger along the dark wood casing the way someone might touch the spine of a book they were considering reading. "Does it work?" she asked. "Not for a long time," I said. Clara looked at me, then back at the clock. Something in her expression, careful, thoughtful, older than her years, told me she understood that the clock was more than a clock. "Can I come back?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "you can." I updated my will in November. The lawyer's name was Grace Hartwell, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and a calm, unhurried manner that reminded me oddly of Frank. I sat in her office on a grey afternoon and told her what I wanted. Clear language, no ambiguity. Diana would receive what was fair, the house eventually, and a portion of what remained. But the antique shop, the inventory, the lease, the business account would go to Clara. Grace raised one eyebrow, just one. "Are you certain?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "I'm certain." She wrote it down. I signed. The pen moved steadily across the paper, and when I set it down, I felt not relief, but something quieter, a settling, the way a house feels after a storm has passed and the windows are open and the air is finally clean. Diana's letter arrived in December. It was handwritten, unusual for her, who communicated almost exclusively by text and email. The envelope was addressed in her careful slanted script, and inside were 2 pages of cream-coloured paper covered in words I read standing at the kitchen counter, still in my coat. She wrote about her childhood, about the ways she had felt invisible in her own family. Overshadowed, she said, by Frank's illness, by my grief, by the weight of a household where everyone was surviving but no one was truly living. She wrote about wanting to build something that was entirely her own, about the wedding being the first thing in her life she had made without compromise or negotiation. She did not apologize. Not exactly. But she explained, and the explanation, in its own way, was more honest than an apology would have been. I read the letter twice, folded it carefully, put it in the drawer of the side table by my bed, the drawer where I kept Frank's last letter to me, and a photograph of Diana at 5 years old, gap-toothed and laughing, holding a butterfly in her cupped hands. I did not write back. Not because I was angry. Because some things don't need a response. They only need to be received, held, and set down. Clara came to the shop every Saturday after that. She learned quickly how to handle the antique pieces, how to talk to customers, how to read the small tells that said someone was interested versus someone who was merely browsing. She was good with people in a way that surprised me, patient, observant. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, it mattered. One Saturday in January, she looked up from the workbench where she had been polishing a set of silver spoons and said, "Margaret, can I try something with the clock?" I looked at her, then at the grandfather clock, standing in its corner the way it had for 11 years, silent, still, wound each morning by hands that remembered the motion even when the motion led nowhere.
"Show me," I said.
Clara spent 3 Saturdays on the clock. She researched the mechanism, watched videos, ordered a small replacement part that arrived in a padded envelope. She worked carefully, methodically, with a concentration that reminded me of Frank, the same quiet focus, the same respect for the thing itself. On the 4th Saturday, she wound the key. The clock ticked. Once, twice. Then steadily, a quiet, even rhythm that filled the back of the shop like a heartbeat, returning after a long silence. I stood very still and listened to it. Now, in the evenings, I make tea. I sit in Frank's old chair by the living room window, the one with the worn velvet armrest, the one that still holds the faint shape of a man who read newspapers there for 40 years. I drink the tea slowly. I watch the street outside, the way the light changes in late afternoon, the way the world goes on with its ordinary business and does not require anything of me. The navy dress still hangs in my closet. I have not worn it again. I do not need to. It did what it was meant to do. I am not waiting for anything. I am not missing anything I cannot live without. If you are reading this and you recognize yourself, the woman who always says yes, who makes herself smaller so others can be comfortable, who has given and given until only the habit of giving remains, and she has forgotten what it felt like to want something for herself. You are allowed to stop. Your no is not cruelty. It is not selfishness. It is the first honest thing you have said in years. Your worth is not measured by how useful you are to someone else's story. You have your own story, and it is not finished. The clock is ticking, and so are you.